if you are not connecting homeless New Yorkers to the housing that they so desperately need, then you cannot deem anything you're doing to be a success. We are going to take an approach that understands its mission is connecting those New Yorkers to housing, whether it's supportive housing, whether it's rental housing, whatever kind of housing it is. Because what we have seen is the treatment of homelessness as if it is a natural part of living in this city, when in fact it's more often a reflection of a political choice being made time and time again.
Zohran Mamdani announced that 16 people have died from the recent cold snap. 13 of those deaths were related to hypothermia and 3 were overdoses. Of the victims, most of them were homeless people who were not in shelters.
You know, I think the story of our decade, especially as it pertains to your everyday life, is the way in which woke politics straight up makes America less safe and actively gets people killed. It's the unfortunate reality, but it's the truth. As much as we want to sit here and laugh at these stupid hippies and their ridiculous ideas, the truth is that these policies have real-world consequences. As one example, letting dangerous criminals out of jail after they've been arrested anywhere from 15 to 72 different times gets people like Irina Zarutska killed. Opening the border to millions of third world invaders and foreign terrorists gets people like Laken Riley killed. Heck, allowing unqualified people to operate things like airplanes and large commercial motor vehicles in the name of DEI or supporting immigration gets Americans killed. We've seen more examples of this, frankly, than we can even keep track of. And that's exactly why I'd like to speak today about the reality of Mamdani's New York. And I think this may be even the story of his mayorship as a whole, which is the way in which stupid, hippie-sounding left-wing policies resulted not just in smoking weed or loving the flowers, but actually right now, as New York City deals with historic cold, is getting people killed. A couple of months ago, we actually told you the story. This was before Mamdani even got inaugurated into office, of how his administration would be reversing the Eric Adams policy of clearing homeless encampments and not allowing the homeless to sleep in the streets. You know, we're going to put you in a shelter if we deem it necessary. The Mamdani administration tried to reverse that and say, well, it's cruel because if people want to sleep on the street, then that should be their right. We shouldn't be forcing anyone into shelters or mental institutions because that's so, you know, mean or bad or not woke or whatever, despite the fact that we clearly see anyone who lives in America knows the vast majority of homeless people are dealing with severe drug addiction or mental health problems. And no, very likely they will not just voluntarily commit themselves to rehab or a shelter where they can't do drugs or whatever it is. And now, as you could likely expect, the policy of allowing the homeless to still sleep on the streets, as New York City is dealing with a historic cold and ice and snowstorm, right, has resulted in the deaths of around a dozen or so homeless people. So in other words, what are we saying here, right? The Mamdani policy of supposedly being tolerant or nice to the homeless, it's bigoted to say that they shouldn't have the right to sleep on public streets, has resulted, as New York City freezes, oh, who could have seen this coming, right? Homeless people have now froze to death because the city refused to move them off the streets. Isn't it interesting how that works? Who could have possibly seen that coming? Well, we'll tell you all about that here today and some of the mounting political pressure now to retreat on these ridiculous and stupid policies. First, though, guys, do us a favor. If you enjoy our content, make sure hit that like button down below. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. We greatly appreciate the support, but it also ensures that you can stay up to date with all of the latest news and coverage. And that said, let me just point out that before this whole scandal and all this has taken place, countless people tried to warn Mamdani as to what a dumb policy this would be. And I don't often do this, but that also included ourselves. So let's go back down memory lane, actually.
We said it's inhumane to walk by someone that clearly they can't take care of their basic needs.
Mamdani believes it's inhumane to end encampments and would use involuntary commitment in the rarest of cases.
If you are not connecting homeless New Yorkers to the housing that they so desperately need, then you cannot deem anything you're doing to be a success.
Dave Giffen runs the Coalition for the Homeless.
The only way we're going to solve this problem is by creating enough permanent housing such that people don't have to live on subway platforms and live on the streets. And I'm sorry to say it, but no mayor so far has done a good job.
Tonight, Mayor Adams is defending his approach.
If he's stating he's no longer going to implement a smart policy on our part, New Yorkers are going to see the repercussions of that.
Well, David Giffen credits Adams for moving some homeless into stable housing, but not, he says, nearly enough. He credits Mamdani for taking an approach that he says may be successful. Live tonight at Penn Station, NJ Burke at Channel 7 Eyewitness News.
Well, I'd like to point out that in basically any woke, left-wing, progressive, third worldist city, whatever you want to call them, that this approach has been tried, all it does is increase the homeless population. And let me explain to you why. You notice he says that he wants to stop the, what is it called? Involuntary institutionalization, whatever it is, right? Where you forcibly take a homeless person off the street or you forcibly tell them they have to move. Okay. Well, again, I say here, guys, that if the vast majority of homeless people are on drugs, and by the way, much like we've covered in Portland, by the way, these people know that as a homeless person, much like Mamdani's now implementing the same policy, they're a protected class, then what incentive do they actually have to move? Because when you build those incentive structures that, hey, we should decriminalize homelessness and not really touch them or their drug use because, after all, that's very inhumane. They're the unhoused, blah, blah, blah. Then this is the exact result that you get. Worth noting, by the way, what are Zohran Mamdani's, some of his two top policies, right? Decriminalize drugs and prostitution, and now he's announced, don't clean up or move the homeless. What do you think you're going to get? Because after all, even if he somehow magically, in his unicorn promise world, manages to build a bunch of homeless shelters and finds places for them to live, why would they want to do that? Because if they're addicted to drugs and they're using drugs, and for instance, you go to a homeless shelter and you're not allowed to use drugs in there, then obviously they're going to stay on the street. Ask them and give them a choice. They're going to stay on the street. Now, if you say involuntarily, we're going to take you to rehab by the means of law enforcement, then that's a different thing. But guess what? Zohran Mamdani thinks that's inhumane because he really thinks these people, all these crazy fentanyl zombies, that's just a byproduct of socioeconomic factors. If you just gave them housing, right? And our socialist worldview, suddenly they'd become doctors and engineers. I don't think it really works that way. Oh, well, who is this guy? I don't know. Seems like he's making a great point. Although I don't want to really celebrate myself because in total fairness, anyone with a lick of common sense could totally understand why it would be a bad idea to essentially decriminalize homelessness and refuse to do anything about clearing homeless people off of the streets. That even included the former mayor of New York City. And by the way, many others, because yes, it was bad policy. It was a bad idea. And guess what? When confronted with a moment like this, where you have freezing cold temperatures outside, and by the way, I understand it's historic, but it's not uncommon for New York City to deal with cold weather. How do you think this was ever going to end, Zohran?
Elect Zohran Mamdani announced that once he takes office on January 1st, he'll stop sweeping homeless encampments across our city. I won't criticize him on every issue, but when a policy harms New Yorkers, I have to speak up. Showing compassion for those sleeping on the streets is not a sweep. It is humane. Ending this action will create a quality of life nightmare. Just look at cities that allow encampments and you'll see the damage. Worse, leaving people to suffer in the cold isn't just neglectful, it's a disgrace. Throughout the last close to 4 years, I was adamant about cleaning those encampments because we cannot tolerate a city that turns a blind eye to human suffering. I urge the incoming administration to rethink this, and I urge New Yorkers to raise their voices. Let's call it what it is. Labeling the abandonment of our homeless neighbors as progress is a slap in the face to real progress. It's not just misguided, it's shameful. And we need to call it out for the disgrace that it is.
Yeah, well, obviously, Eric Adams was correct about this. There was never anything compassionate about essentially allowing a bunch of drug-addicted and mentally ill people to suffer and sleep and live on the streets. It's not compassionate, first of all, to the citizens of New York who have to deal with that stuff on a daily basis, right? Because there's a lot of violence and chaos that goes down when you have these people who are, delusional, they have issues, chasing people around in subway stations and all of that. But secondly, straight up, it's just not compassionate to those people themselves either, right? They need help. They're not in a mental state likely to consent or accept the help, which is why you need law enforcement to come in and say, no, we're going to move you. You have severe mental issues. You're addicted to drugs. And no, you're not allowed to just live out in the streets like this, right? But no, in the name of compassion or something, this is now the scene we're seeing during the cold spell in New York right now. Here's one scene, for example, that's been going viral on the internet of a homeless guy just clearly freezing in the streets and in those temperatures. And now, as a result of it, ladies and gentlemen, what have we seen? At least 16 different deaths have occurred in New York City as a result of the cold. And guess where the majority of those deaths are obviously coming from? The very homeless people that Mamdani says in the name of compassion, it would have been inhumane to move off of these streets. Take a listen.
A severe cold front continues to bear down on our city. Today is our 11th consecutive day of below freezing weather, and we could very well be in the middle of the longest period of consecutive sub-32 degree weather in our city's entire history. Without temperatures rising above freezing, snow has hardened into blocks of ice. But the greatest danger posed by this sustained cold is to vulnerable New Yorkers who remain exposed to the elements. As of this morning, 16 of our fellow New Yorkers have passed away outside during this brutal stretch of cold. In 13 of these cases, preliminary findings indicate that hypothermia played a role, and 3 of these deaths appear to be overdose deaths. We await final results from the medical examiner's office and will inform New Yorkers as we learn more. Each of these lives lost is a tragedy. My heart was with the family of those mourning their loved ones.
Very curious how he doesn't seem to mention who those deaths are or specifically how those deaths happen, right? We know the medical cause, hypothermia. Obviously, that makes sense. But he's not telling you the full story, perhaps for a reason. Here is the full story, though.
This week, New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani announced that 16 people have died from the recent cold snap. 13 of those deaths were related to hypothermia, and 3 were overdoses. Of the victims, most of them were homeless people who were not in shelters.
Unfortunately, there's become a real sense of distrust over the years, and a feeling that the shelter system is not there to help you for too many people.
Mamdani said that nobody who's died was living in a homeless encampment and that he wouldn't follow his predecessor in physically removing the encampments. He'd rather offer services to convince people to come in from the cold. The Staten Island Borough president told me that people need to be physically taken off the streets for their own good.
If you allow people to voluntarily stay on the streets during severe winter weather, that will basically translate into a death sentence. And tragically, that's what we've been seeing for the last week or so.
On the other hand, Mamdani's administration has opened up single rooms for people, sent mobile warming units around the city, and loosened intake procedures at shelters.
So far, he seems to be doing the right thing. He's sending a lot of people out onto the street. He's deploying staff from all over the city. We really need to see every city agency involved in this and every new...
Yeah, well, again, none of this has ever been hard to understand or predict. It's pretty basic common sense. And by the way, extremely precedented within the city. Many of the people who die during blizzards or cold fronts that take place, frankly, anywhere, very likely are going to be the homeless people. That's why it should be your goal politically, right? Or administratively, forget politically. It should be your goal as a city government, regardless of politics, to say, especially when it's cold outside, we're going to make a point to move the homeless. And yes, if necessary, for their own good and for their own safety, if it takes police forcing homeless people to move off the streets, then that's what we have to do. And you have to appreciate all the moralizing that's spoken at us from Mamdani and these so-called homeless rights activists. They say it's immoral, it's so deeply inhumane to force people who are, again, mentally ill, addicted to drugs, against their will to get off the streets, to which I say, okay, so is this humane? Is them freezing to death because you refuse to actually do the right thing and move them and actually be compassionate towards them, thinking that it's some type of like civil right to just live out and camp on a sidewalk? Has that ended very well, guys? What's humane about them freezing to death in the cold? Which, by the way, given your policy and your whole thing about we're only going to do it voluntarily, this was always something that you could have seen coming, you know? And by the way, it never has been immoral or inhumane. I'm going to repeat again. It's the most compassionate thing you can do for these people. And no, there is no moral right to just live on a public sidewalk. You know who that sidewalk belongs to? The people, the taxpayers, right? People don't pay taxes so that way they can't walk, you know? People aren't paying taxes thinking, oh, I'm voting Democrat, I'm being compassionate, I'm helping people out. You would think, by the way, Democrats would be the ones because they support higher taxes and more public funds, right? You would think, at least logically, guys, anyone ever considered this? In theory, you should see less homeless people in a liberal city if the liberals are right about the world, right? Because it's just the greedy capitalists and right-wing, you know, billionaires and things like that are creating hunger in the world and poverty. Okay, so why are there so many homeless always in liberal areas? Isn't it interesting how that works? Yeah, maybe because homelessness in America, properly understood, is not about people not having enough to eat or not being able to pay the rent in most cases. And I'm talking specifically, right, about the homeless that you so often see sleeping in the streets. No, the vast majority, sure, not all, but the vast majority of these cases are linked to mental health issues and drugs. Hence why your policy has always been stupid. Hence why your policy doesn't make any sense. And just the prime example, again, of people dying as a result of woke politics. Because the real world, its harsh realities and common sense says exactly the argument we've been making. But in the woke, hippie, flowerland mindset, oh, you know, we should respect these people. They shouldn't be forced to do anything against their will. Blah, blah, blah. You know, homeless rights. We need to have giving them guaranteed housing, and that's the problem. The problem is not drugs, it's not mental illness, it's housing, right? Because everybody deep in their heart is fundamentally good and can actually make their own choices, blah, blah, blah. And then we have the reality. The reality is your policy just gets people killed. And do they reverse on it? Do they backtrack? Do they say, okay, all right, wait a minute, maybe we were wrong? No, they're going to double down, and then you're going to see it happen again in the future. And unfortunately, that's just the reality of Mamdani's New York, you know? And for now, the people who are suffering the most are the homeless people, but you can fully guess in the future, it's going to be his voters, right? Many of the people who support him. These things affect everyone, because ultimately, when public safety gets sacrificed for wokeness, you get some bad consequences. And don't say that we didn't all collectively try to warn you, because we did. Yeah, you should clean homelessness off of your streets. Yeah, homeless people just living on sidewalks everywhere is not a good thing. It's not a civil right. It's not a lifestyle, okay? And no, it should not be allowed. And whoa, couldn't have seen it coming. This might be a consequence of that, especially in a city that deals with snow on a regular basis. Whoa, I know. We can't believe someone is telling us this. Yeah, I know. All right, anyways, guys, that said, let me know your thoughts on this in the comment section down below. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and until next time, God bless and peace.